remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment. And I hope you enjoy the interview. Sir Trevor Phillips, it's an honor to have you on the platform. You are an award-winning journalist, author, writer, and you're known for all of the work that you've done in the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Sky News as well, in terms of when you covered for Sophie Rich, presented Trevor Phillips on Sunday, and you've also presented many other TV shows, including The Great Debate, and you've interviewed the likes of Rishi Sunak, Nadeem Zahawi, and many other well-known ministers within politics. So thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
The first question I'd like to ask you is, please tell us about your experiences growing up, and particularly what inspired you to become an author, journalist, and writer.
Well, I think probably I should answer that the reverse way round. I think that the best answer I can give is that I can't particularly claim that I was inspired to do what I do. It turned out that I had an opportunity, and I took it. I was very lucky, and I think I would be making it up, I guess, if I were to say that I decided to do this, take the career path I took in some sort of deliberate way. I was the 10th of 10 children, and my family came here in the early 1950s because my sister wanted to be a nurse. I grew up partly in England, but actually mostly in Guyana, which is where my family comes from. I think for a variety of reasons. It was probably when my parents wanted me to experience that life. But I think more, to be honest, necessity. There are a lot of us, and I think my parents just decided it would be easier for me and for them if I were living what we would call at home during my childhood. I had a very, mostly, all childhoods are happy. I think mine was quite content, and I was lucky to grow up in a loving home, my aunt and grandmother mostly, and in a small town. Georgetown was and is a small town, with people who knew me and who I knew, and in a way of life that perhaps has gone now, but I was very fortunate. And I went to a very good school, which still produces pretty regularly the Caribbean top student at A level each year. So I was very fortunate with all of that. I decided I wanted to be a scientist, but I think the direct answer to your question about what made me go in the direction I did go was that in the end I decided I wasn't a very good scientist, so I had to find something else to do. And somebody gave me the opportunity to become a television researcher, and the rest sort of became history.
Thank you so much for that answer. And following on from that, from 2007 to 2012, you were the chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. How can businesses, private sector and public sector organizations facilitate conversations surrounding equality and diversity?
Well, the first and most important thing the business has to do is to serve its customers or clients and its shareholders. That's the duty of a business, and in a sense, all businesses are essentially creatures of their boards and their leadership. That's the job of the board and the leadership, to make sure that the business is fulfilling the requirements of its those who pay for its products and its services. So I think that the first and most important thing is that organizations, commercial organizations, don't have to think of themselves as sort of doing good. I think they just need to think about what is the best way in which I can do my job. And since typically the job of an organization or the customers and clients of an organization will include people of all different kinds, and potentially, if it wants to do well, quite often people, the kinds of people that it currently doesn't have amongst its clients and customers, then it should be thinking about who are we looking after, who are we serving? Are we serving everybody, all our clients, as well as we might? And if the answer to that is no, then that's the case for thinking seriously about, are we really understanding what our women customers or our disabled customers or our Black customers want from us? And I think that's where the diversity and inclusion journey starts. All of us who run businesses or work in them owe our existence to those who pay for us. And part of the bargain is that we think of them in their fullness. They're not just there to keep us in vanilla flakes or Doritos or whatever it is that we spend our money on. They are our purpose. So I think that the most important thing for all businesses is not just to follow rules. And there are things, that everybody knows there are things you should be doing. You should be measuring your pay gaps. You should be making sure that everybody in your business has a voice and so on. But those things follow naturally if you treat all your customers and your clients with respect and you remember that they are the most important thing. I was for a while president at John Lewis, and there is no question at the John Lewis Partnership that the customer is always king, always the most important person. And that's why it's such a successful business, because it is ingrained in every partner that whatever you're doing, you think about the customer. When I was president there, it was always very telling. If I might be visiting a store and I might be walking around with the manager. I wasn't the most important person in the company, but I was a pretty important person in the company. But I can be absolutely certain if I'm walking along the fish counter in Waitrose or the stationery, the haberdashers section in a John Lewis department store, and the manager I'm with sees a customer who might be looking a bit lost, I know exactly what's going to happen next. He's going to say, Trevor, would you mind standing there for a minute? I need to look after this customer, because the customer is always going to be more important even than the chairman or the president of the company.
Thank you so much. And following on from that, there are lots of companies when they do their diversity and inclusion monitoring or review, there are lots of people that tend to be sometimes underrepresented. So what advice would you give to those companies, especially in the last 2 years, with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that went on with there are lots of companies that are looking at how they kind of make their workforce more equal and representative. So what advice would you give to a company or a board that might struggle in that area?
Well, first, the first thing you have to do is to ascertain exactly what the problem is. And that means absolutely good data. So, for example, my company, Green Park, does audits. And one of the things that we do is we will reflect back the composition of the workforce to the company. And we've got some tools that allow us to measure it very precisely. So, for example, one company, we could say, we were able to say to them, yep, you've got a really healthy number of West African staff. But have you noticed that they are all Ghanaian and none of them are Nigerian? What's that about? Now, I can't really tell you much in detail, but it's simply the fact that they knew we were able to tell them that, and they knew it meant that they could investigate the problem and decide to do something about it. So the first and most important thing is good data. And second thing is be ready to talk to your staff, but more importantly, to listen to them. Quite often, I think bosses might spot a problem, for example, underrepresentation of women, and they will decide what the answer is before they've actually talked to the people who know why there's a problem. So those are the things that I would absolutely start with. Make sure you've got good data and listen to the people who work for you or with you.
Thank you so much for that answer. And following on from that, I'd like to kind of draw upon what you said about your role in the John Lewis Partnership. So you were the president of the Partnership Council at the John Lewis Partnership. What do you think are some of the biggest barriers that prevent young Black people from operating in senior board level positions?
Well, actually, in the John Lewis case, in fact, there wasn't so much of an obstacle because, in fact, the way that the John Lewis Partnership works, it has a board which has, as you know, it's owned by the partners, the 80,000 partners, and they elect a council who essentially own the company. The management and the executive leadership of the company form the majority of the board, but the council, the partners, do elect 5, I think, of the board members. And in fact, there is recent history, it wasn't always the case, but recent history that some of those board members are ethnic minorities. And of course, the executive chairman now is Dame Sharon White, who is Jamaican heritage and is probably the most outstanding, I was going to say young relative to me anyway, executive in British business. So John Lewis actually has pointed the way. I think that the thing with a lot of the companies is that they need not to be afraid of different. I think that quite a lot of companies recognize merit when it comes clothed in a shape and a color that it recognizes. When it comes in clothes or a color that is a bit unfamiliar, I think it's sometimes quite hard for senior people to see merit. So I think the most important thing is for people to be open-minded about what good looks like. What would be a good board member? That's one thing. And the second thing is, I think companies that have been successful in diversifying their leadership have often done so through programs of sponsorship, by which we mean not mentoring. Mentoring is, in a way, what happens when the protege is in the room. You give him or her advice and you talk to them about their work. Sponsorship is something rather different. Sponsorship is what happens when the protege is not in the room, when senior people are deciding who will we give this next promotion opportunity to, who will we send to a conference so they've got the experience of being out there representing the firm. And it's really important to have somebody in the room, because you're not in the room, arguing your case and saying, I know Micah, he's a smart young guy, he would benefit from this. I want to make the case for him going. So companies which have done programs of sponsorship, I think, have been very successful, and that's something I'd very much recommend.
Thank you. And I'd also like to ask you, you are a very well-known broadcaster. You covered for Sophie Ridge when she was on maternity leave, and you hosted Trevor Phillips on Sunday. and you also hosted things such as the Great Debate. So I want to ask you, whether it be political, being a political broadcaster, or even just a general broadcaster, what three skills do you think any aspiring broadcaster must have?
Hmm. Well, I think I can name two of them at least, and I'll think about whether there's a third. The first and most important thing for any journalist is to be genuinely curious about the world.
Mm-hmm.
Bad journalists are people who have decided what the answer is before they've asked a question.
Mm-hmm.
And you can read it in the newspapers, and you can see it on television. The people who are really not that interested in finding things out, the best are the ones who are genuinely engaged in trying to understand what's happening in the world. My first model was a man called Brian Walden, who was probably one of the great television interviewers, my lifetime anyway. And Brian had been a member of parliament before he went into television. And I think everybody pretty much agreed he had a very superior intellect, but his intellect was devoted largely to trying to understand the world. And he did interviews not in order to show, oh, look at me, how clever I am. Look at how I can get somebody or embarrass the interview, but because he was genuinely curious. Mrs. Thatcher, what will you do about inflation or about public sector reform and so on? And he genuinely wanted to know and really genuinely wanted to, and I know this because I spent a lot of time with him. In fact, he taught me really what a television interview is about. He genuinely wanted to know what the person would do. The second thing I think that a proper interviewer has to do is to be able to listen. I think that there's a tendency amongst some interviewers to ask a question, then shut down for a little while they wait for the other person to stop speaking, but so they can then ask their next question. And that actually what they're really thinking about all the time is their questions. They think there's a sort of bad version of television interviewing in which people think that the question is more important than the answer. I don't agree with that. I think if somebody's going to give you half an hour of their time, and I mean the viewer, not the interviewee, if the viewer is going to give you half an hour or 15 minutes of their time, then you should do them in respect of understanding. They're not turning on because they think you're lovely. They're turning on because they want to know what your interviewee actually thinks. And, there are lots of people who say, oh, well, you should interrupt them, you should press them because otherwise they'll get away with not answering the question and so on. Well, the reason people get away with answering questions is usually because you ask them the wrong question. By and large, if you ask them, think about it properly beforehand, and you ask them a question to which there has to be an answer, you don't need to interrupt them. And if people wriggle or they try to slide off, in some ways that's as instructive to the viewer as any amount of shouting and yelling at them might be. Viewers are smart. They know when somebody's trying to avoid answering the proper question. And I would say that the last thing, and in a way it leads from the first two, is one shouldn't take oneself too seriously. I think that one of the great diseases of our time is journalists who are basically not very important people. We're basically weasels who are there to being annoying to people because we're ferreting away and trying to find things out. But we're not important. The person who is important is the person who has to make a decision in business, who has to decide whether he or she is going to employ 500 people, or the politician who's going to promote a new piece of legislation or build a new road. That they are the ones who matter. And I think a little dose of humility on the part of the interviewee the interviewer, I beg your pardon, is always a good thing.
And hop! Right, you horrible lot. I was too young for national service, but I was in the cadets. We wore the uniform, that would have been great for you. No class, no race, no religion. Dewberry, pay attention. 1 in 6 Britons never mix with somebody outside their own class. Nearly half of us don't know somebody of a different race. Ah, Ferrari.
Yes, sir.
What would a year of national citizen service done for you when you were 16?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Shabby. I know you won't want this, but let's bribe them. Let's bribe them. Let's give them an allowance. Let's give them a place on Love Island, for all I care. But this would be the making of our young people. Doesn't have to be military. If they get through it at 16, give them the vote. If they refuse, they don't get to vote till they're 21. As you were.
So, just to confirm, Trevor, the militaristic authoritarian, you are actually talking about compulsory national service.
Yes, this is me, Rachel. I think every young person should have to play some role in the community. I don't necessarily mean they've got to be in a trench, but they can do something in the community, help old people, do something in the environment, but it has to be mandatory.
See, I don't understand how you would look at this nation's 16-year-olds and what they're facing now. So if they're at school, they're over-tested. If they're not at school, they're underpaid. They're looking at a future with a climate crisis, which we don't show any sign of dealing with. They're looking at a future where they're not going to get secure, stable employment. You know, the chances of them having precarious employment are high. The chances of them being able to afford their own home are very, very slim. So you look at all the things that young people have to deal with in this country today, and that's your solution? I just think that a country that in peacetime can find no better task for its youth than compulsory national service has really lost its way.
Yeah, but you're missing part of the point of what young people today are missing. They can't solve the housing problem tomorrow. But what we do know is that too many of our young people never get to meet somebody who is not like them, never meet anybody outside of their social circle. That when we try to do this is now 15, 16 years ago when I chaired the Commission for Racial Equality. Basically what we did is we took kids from all around the country away for a summer camp in Cumbria. They loved it because for the first time, we're talking about people from the Northeast. They had never met a Muslim before that camp. It changed their lives.
Did you force them to do it?
No, it was voluntary.
So that's quite a big difference.
But we won't get it to happen unless every child has this opportunity.
How long for? How long would they serve, Trevor?
Well, the people who are now prompting this are talking about maybe a couple of months or even 6 months. Rory Stewart, I think, has promoted the idea of several months.
I think I was nervous when I saw you dressed like that. Anyway. I was nervous as you.
This is the real me.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the real me. I now feel able to share with you.
We always had a feeling it was.
Just think of all the high-profile jobs you've had, and there you are. No, but when you started to, because I thought it was, as Rachel, I thought it was just the military. But no, I think it's a very good idea. We've got to work out what they do as regards their GCSEs to their A levels. These young people. But what absolutely sold it to me, so I completely applaud the idea. And I didn't know those shocking statistics that too many of our young people don't mix with different skin colours or different faiths. And we are speaking at the end of a week where in London we have seen, and I know this is an unfortunate word, a huge spike in fatal stabbings and other attacks involving a lot of, not all, but a lot of young people. If this gives them some sense of discipline, it has to be a good idea.
Thank you. That's something I actually like about your journalism style, because my grandmother always used to watch Trevor Phillips on Sunday. I liked how you always brought the guest back to the question, and I thought it was really brilliant how you did that. So, even following on from that, a lot of people will look at you as, as this really accomplished journalist. You've made history in so many ways, and you were also given a knighthood in 2021 for your services to equality and human rights. But they might not know about some of the challenges you went through to get where you are. So could you share some of those challenges with us and how you overcame them to become the successful and pioneering broadcaster and journalist you are today?
You put it very nicely. There's a slight feeling that you've been writing my obituary already. Look, I know that people do talk about their challenges, and it's reasonable to do so. But I would preface anything by saying I just think I've been incredibly lucky. And anything that I would cite as a challenge in my life is completely dwarfed by the good things that I've had. You know, I chose the right parents to start with. You know, they were ambitious. They wanted better for all of us, and they taught me that you can do better for yourself, but it takes hard work and it takes understanding what you're good at, and being self-aware, those kinds of things. I've been very fortunate in the love and support of my family, and also my friends and colleagues. So all of those things, and I'm lucky. I was born with some facilities. I think the challenges that I would say for myself are they're familiar ones, which I think everybody would from my sort of background would acknowledge, which is that you spend a lot of your life trying to remind people that you are an individual and that what's on the outside doesn't define you on the inside. So a lot of, I guess, the challenge, bluntly speaking, if you're a person of color, is stopping people thinking they know you before they know you. And that means you've got to work hard, you've got to spend time with people. You have to sometimes do things that are a little bit unexpected so that everybody knows that you, for example, that you think for yourself and you don't just follow a pattern. I would say, if I'm honest, the biggest challenge for me personally was realizing that some of the things I wanted to do with my life, I wasn't quite good enough at those things to be that. I'm good at some things. They weren't necessarily the things I most wanted to do in life, but that's a choice that everyone has to make. So, for example, if I'd had my complete freedom, I would have loved to have been a good a professional, even a mediocre musician. Unfortunately, I'm not even good enough to be mediocre. So that's why I'm not a musician and I am a journalist. You know, I like writing, but if I'd had absolute freedom to decide what I wanted to do, I would prefer to sit in front of a piano or with a trumpet than in front of a keyboard.
Thank you so much for that answer. And another thing that in general that inspires me about you is your willingness to speak about the issues that are affecting society. So I was watching your panel discussion on Question Time where you talked about gang violence.
Uh-huh.
And that just blew me away, because with so many young Black Britons, you know, even the political landscape is something that more and more young people are becoming concerned about, which is knife crime. And you said that we basically need to stop glorifying gang culture. So I just wanted to ask you, how can this be done at like grassroots level? Because there's many parents that are not sure where to start in terms of getting their children to listen to the right music or hang out in the right environments. There are many people that don't know where to start. So what advice would you give with regards to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that there is a responsibility on people like me who have the public platform to use our voices, not because I think, you know, anybody will do what I say. I don't think stuff works like that. But what I think you can do if you are a public figure is give people who aren't in that lucky situation the courage, the encouragement, the license to speak out in their own circle. I think quite often it feels a bit daring to do the right thing if nobody else is doing the right thing. I think sometimes what public figures can do is just, even if you're in the minority, is just to give the person who wants to do the right thing or say the right thing an excuse to stand out against the crowd. So that's why I, in a way, make the point I make. I mean, to be honest, it is more because I look around where I live in London and I think, and I see what's happening to our young people, I mean, young Black people. And I think to myself, if I'd been unlucky enough to be born 30 years later or something than I was, that would be me. And would I be alive now? Quite probably not. One of the reasons that I spent a lot of time in the Caribbean is that my parents took me out of school because they wanted to move to the United States, which they did. And they said, actually, we don't want to leave you here in England because we're not happy with the way you're going. And we're not going to take you to America because we see what happens to young Black people in America and we don't want you to grow up there. That's why I went back to the Caribbean. Simple and straightforward. My parents were very clear and very wise, I think. So the first thing I think is give people an example. Secondly, support families in making the right decision. And then I think the third thing is that we've got to be able to tell our young people there are many ways of being an authentic, stand-up, serious Black person. There's a book by the Harvard academic, Professor Henry Louis Gates, Skip Gates, called 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Man. And there are interviews with well-known Black figures. And, there's nothing dramatic about any of them, but each one of them is different. And I think if we could say one thing to our young people is you don't have to be like that in order to be yourself. Being big and bad and all that, it's one way of being a Black man. In my view, it's a particularly stupid way of being a Black man, but it is. But there are other ways. And there are other ways which are better for you, better for your, the person you're going to live with, and the children that you hope they're going to bring up one day. And I think if nothing else, maybe one way to do this is to say to our young people, you can be more than the thing that you are seeing on YouTube. Never mind the whole issue of personal safety and protection. I think what's more important is to be able to say to people, there's more to you than following this crowd.
Thank you so much. And just quickly following on from that, especially in recent times, there's been lots of TV shows, lots of TV shows such as Top Boy and all of these kind of things that are kind of portraying it. And one argument of some directors and some producers would be they're trying to show the gang culture from both sides. That's their argument. I'm not sure if I entirely agree.
It's rubbish, isn't it? It's rubbish. It's rubbish. If you watch these things,
yeah,
they are they glamorize that life.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? And this is a rough thing to say, I'm afraid. most of these things are made for white people to make them feel a touch of danger. But of course, the difference is when the credits roll, they can go back to Surrey.
Mm-hmm.
When the credits roll, we're walking out in Hackney or Harlesden or Moss Side or Handsworth. Yeah. And we're in a real thing. They've had an hour of or 2 hours of excitement and, you know, feeling that they've touched danger, but they've never been in any danger. Mm-hmm. But if you are the person who has to walk out of the cinema or walk out of your living room and be in that real situation, it's not fun. It's not a joke. It's not exciting. And this whole argument that they're trying to show something, it's nonsense. It's entertainment for people who don't have to live that life.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Want to kick us off on this?
I should first say that, full disclosure, I was born 10 minutes from here, and I grew up in this area. I lived up the road. Everybody in this room will know where Wood Green is, in a postcode which is N226SX. The typical number of sexual and violent crimes in a London postcode is 26. In the postcode where I grew up, it is 226 last year. 226. So this is not it's not across the city, but where it is incredibly serious. And I completely feel for you. There are 3 young people, mostly young men, dying in this city every week from knife crimes. There are 2 women who die from domestic violence every week, and we have rightly ploughed enormous attention and resources into that. We are not yet doing the same thing for these young people. And I think we need to be clear what we're talking about when we're talking about knife crime. This is not some accidental thing. What is happening here is young people are being hunted down by packs of other people. They are being stabbed. And aside from the ones who are dying, there are hundreds in this city who are being stabbed. And forgive me for being absolutely blunt about this. There is now a thing that they do. They stab kids in the anus so they have to wear colostomy bags. This is vicious. It's a war and it's out of control. And we and the authorities seem not to be too interested except to say, let's have an argument about, are there more police, are there more cuts? Actually, everybody who knows about this knows that these kids are doing this in a way that you'd have to have North Korean levels of policing to catch them at it. So I think we've got to do some different things. First of all, we've got to understand what's happening here. And the first thing is who's doing the killing and who's doing the dying. And let me be absolutely frank. It is young black men who are dying. And by the way, young black men who are doing the killing. So we need to focus on those communities and those areas and not pretend that this is something which is just abstract. Secondly, we need to help some of the communities where the young people have come straight from war zones. In this area, I think everybody here will know what I'm talking about. We throw them into schools.
Well, for people who don't live in here, the audience watching
London is a very mixed community, it's vibrant, all the rest of it, and we receive, rightly, people from terrible backgrounds, trauma, children who have seen their relatives killed in front of them. And what do? We put them straight into schools. We don't help them. We don't give them therapy. That's the kind of thing we need to do. We need to first of all, locate the problem properly. Secondly, we need to spend as much as we can to help these young people find a way through. I mean, I could talk about this all night, and I know I haven't got the time. I feel so passionately about this, I'm sorry. I could go on about it. But let's take this seriously, and let's not turn this, let me preempt, into an argument about who's going to spend more and more police. That is not going to be the answer. The answer here is recognize who is killing, who is dying, and help those people, not some general policy.
And just a bit of a lighter question,
Yeah.
you spend a lot of time in the studio writing, producing. What hobbies do you engage in, like when you want to relax?
What's a hobby? No, what do I do? Well, I read, and I am very keen on music, and every now and again I pick up. I play. No, I was going to say I play the flugelhorn. I own a couple of flugelhorns. I wouldn't say I play them, but every now and again I get one out, and I think that those are my main recreations. I recently acquired, I hope that's the right word, a grandson, and that's that's a wonderful thing. A grandson is a wonderful toy. Take up a lot of your time. But I'm a family guy. I spend a lot of time with my family. But if I'm honest, actually, Micah, the truth is, I am again very fortunate. I'm however old I am, 68. I'm lucky. I don't have to work, as certainly not at the rate I do. The things I do because I enjoy them. Mm-hmm. So in some senses, I regard writing for newspapers. I've run a couple of businesses, and that's like proper work. Mm-hmm. Appearing on television, at my age, is not like work. That's the hobby, and I enjoyed that. It's fulfilling, it's rewarding, and sometimes it's useful.
Thank you.
And I also, I work with a couple of charities. That's good. I like being able to parlay my good fortune into something that will help other people.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about how we can raise the aspirations of young people from BAME backgrounds, because you've sat in several senior roles. And what advice would you give to young people that aspire to be a chief executive or director? Because currently, if we look at the landscape of many businesses, there's not many young Black people that are sitting on any of these kinds of boards, and they could be discouraged by that narrative.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a couple of things that you can do. One is that the first and most important thing is to show that it is possible. In our company, we appoint 400-500 people a year to board and senior executive positions. And of that number now, about a third are ethnic minorities. Mm-hmm. So the first thing is to show that it is possible. Because I think when I was a young man, I think the main thing you got was, if you look at these big companies or indeed big public organizations, there's none of us there, which means that actually there's no point competing because you're not going to make it. So a large part of what we do is simply showing that though it may be difficult, which it is, and it may be more difficult for our people than others, it is not impossible. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the advice I give to people. And it's rather sort of practical. There's nothing glorious about this. My view is the way that most people get to the top is being really good at something. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean just necessarily being like a great accountant or being a very good lawyer, but being the person who does makes a particular contribution to the team. And that it's a contribution that other people will find hard to match. And in a way, that's quite often how somebody rises to the top, because they carve out a special niche that is theirs. So, if you look at a football team, there's, without being too partisan about it, one of my favourite footballers, because my team, is N'Golo Kante, and of Chelsea. Now, the reason that Kante is, first choice, or has been first choice for every team he's played for, the French teams, Leicester and Chelsea, is that he just does a very particular thing. He's not a great goal scorer. He's not the best defender, but he's the guy who will dominate the middle of the park. He runs like nobody's business. He is as energetic at 90 minutes as he is at 2 minutes through a game. And he's done that because he has some natural abilities, I guess, but he's obviously worked on that and become the guy who does that thing in a way that nobody else actually matches. And I think that my advice to young people is always think, what am I really, really good at? I mean, it's helpful if it's something I like doing as well, but what am I really, really good at? And once I've discovered that, let me hone that. Let me get better than really, really good at. Let me get so good at it that nobody will ever consider anybody else for doing that role. So, in my journalistic career, I think probably the thing that most people would say that I do, I don't really do theatre. I mean, there are people who like Jeremy Paxman does great theatre. I don't do shouting. But what I think people would say is that I'm very analytical and rational, maybe sometimes to a fault. And that also I bring evidence to the table. I'm very, very, keen. So if you ever read any of my journalism, it's always got numbers in it. I'm the geek. And that's, in a way, the third a sort of 2.5 bit of this advice. Be really good at something. And if you're going to choose something that nobody else really wants to do, then it makes it even easier for you to be the guy that everybody always wants on their team. And that's how a lot of people rise.
Thank you so much for that. I've actually read a number of your articles. One of my favorite was when you read an article and it talks about while race matters, class can be a bigger barrier than race. And
yes,
I could resonate with that because I could understand where you were going with it. So because coming from the background that I come and being raised in the area that I was raised in, maybe
which is what, Micah? Tell me.
Sorry.
Which is where?
Sorry. I was raised in Harrow, in the London Borough of Harrow, and during my childhood, I spent time between Harrow and Neasden. So I spent time with my grandmother in Neasden because I attended a nursery there, and I'd go back and I'd stay with my parents in Harrow.
Which part of Harrow?
Oh, I was in South Harrow.
Okay, South Harrow. Yeah, I lived in Stanmore for a while.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I know, very boring, really boring.
Okay.
Yeah.
But your articles, they really make you think because you don't just put forward your opinion, as you say, you use data, and that's always important in journalism.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that if we're thinking particularly about young black people, one of the things that I think you always have to do is, going back to what I said earlier on, one of the things that people always think, especially with black people, not even so much with Asian people, but they think with black people, is that they always think they know you. Mm-hmm. Because they have met a black person, they think, oh, well, I know what that one was like, so this one must be something similar. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I always will say to my people, my mentees, is always bear in your mind, what can I do to unsettle people's assumptions about me? Not to be rude or aggressive or anything like that, but just remind them they don't know you, and that they have to treat you with enough respect to learn about you. So one of the things that one of the reasons that I'm very keen on using numbers is that I'm that way inclined anyway. It's my natural bent. But I sometimes exaggerate it because I know that, bluntly speaking, people don't think that black people do maths. So I sometimes overstress it, so their eyebrows go up and say, "Oh, this isn't quite what I expected." And at that point, they start to listen. They start to listen to me like a human being rather than a stereotype.
Thank you so much. And you're also an accomplished author. You've written 2 books that I know of. One that was about religion and faith, and another one that was titled Windrush: The Irresistible Rise of Multiracial Britain. Now, I read your first book, and that was brilliant because you touched upon everything, intersectionality between different faith groups. And then you've also written this book about Windrush that has also got critical acclaim. So please just take us through the process of writing a very good book, because you don't just write books like any other author. You write books that provide context to real world situations in the UK. So you can just talk us a bit through that process of how you produce those kinds of books.
Well, they're quite different, actually. I mean, I think the book you're referring to on religion is the gosh, those now gone out of my head. The silence. I've forgotten what we called it. Anyway, the pamphlet on. I really wanted to. I thought that we were getting to a place where people in this country, people don't like to make anybody feel uncomfortable, and that's a nice thing about Britain. Unfortunately, sometimes if you've got to deal with difficult topics, people will feel uncomfortable, and you have to be prepared to say, green is green, blue is blue. Here's what it really is. We don't need to be scared about it. We don't even necessarily need to agree about things, but we need to be prepared to speak the truth. We need to be prepared to look at each other in the face and acknowledge disagreement. As long as we're generous with the other person and accept that they take a view not out of spite or stupidity, but because they genuinely believe something, and you want to try to find a way in which you and this other person can get along. So the aim of the book was really to try to persuade people that it's possible to talk about the difficult topics of race and religion for a thing. And it's I'm very pleased you read it. It was probably is probably, other than my children, the thing that I'm proudest of in my life. And I left television in order to be able to make that to do that work. My brother and I co-wrote the book. I also produced a television series that went with it, and there's all sorts of other things that went round it. Because before we wrote the book, nobody'd ever heard of Windrush. Of course, now it's a thing everybody talks about. But I had grown up with a sort of gap I think, in the British story. And what I mean by that is that anybody, people, I pay attention to politics, I pay attention to history and so on. And I knew that my family had been part of the history, but somehow in the tapestry, as it says, of British history has been described, it felt like to me like there was a thread that had been pulled out or had faded. and that thread was the family and the community I came from. And the thing with Windrush was that we were lucky and timely, because what was clear, I mean, that moment was a special moment, you will understand it. And in 1990, well, when did we start that? When I started that project, it was 1994. And I realized that by 1998, some of the people who could tell that story firsthand wouldn't be with us any longer. So that's why I started. I wanted everybody to know this was not a story of Black people. It was, in my mind, a story of British people. Mm-hmm. It was a story of the British people, but it was one that everybody's sort of slightly forgotten or hadn't quite put together, that hadn't quite been written. And I just wanted to be able to say to my family and to their children, this is who we are. And we belong here. We're part of the thing that made this country what it is. And here's the story.
Thank you so much. And the last question I'd like to ask you is, please tell us about any books, any projects, TV series that you are working on between 2022 or 2023, because I'm sure there'll be loads of people that would love to support it.
Yeah, but then I have to kill you, because if I told you what they were.
Fair enough.
No, the one thing I will say is that we would probably, I hope that we'll be able to do something for next year, which will be the 75th anniversary of the arrival of the Empire Windrush. I hope that we might be able to update our book, because everybody who was in it has now passed away. And I think in the quarter of a century since we published it, a lot of things have changed, mostly for the better, actually, I think, in this particular area. And I think it's worth marking that. There's quite an argument that goes on about whether Britain is a good country for people of colour or not. I'm very, very strongly of the opinion it is. Objectively, actually, if you look at the data about racial incidents or about what people feel about discrimination and so on, the UK is, generally speaking, amongst people of colour, felt to be a way better place than anywhere else in Europe. And I think it's worth saying that, not because I think anybody's done us favours, but that actually I think that the struggles and the speaking up and the courage of our parents and our grandparents produced results that make our lives easier and better. And I would like to honour that. I would like to be able to say the fact that, in 1963, people boycotted the buses in Bristol because they wouldn't have Black conductors. And that means that today, nobody can legally say, as they could then, Trevor, you can't have this job because you're Black. Mm. And, I just think we should be proud of that. And so if I've got a project for next year, it's probably to update our work on Windrush.
Thank you so much, Sir Trevor, for such a great interview.
You don't have to call me Sir Trevor, by the way. My wife says you only have to use the title when I'm accompanied by a horse.
Oh.
And she's given me a horse, which she's an imaginary horse, who she calls Fat Norman.
Thank you so much, Trevor.
My pleasure, Micah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me know how it goes on, and if there's anything else we can do to help, let me know.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay. Cheerio.